Joining me for more on this is Ben Bland, Director of the Southeast Asia Project at the Lowy Institute. Ben, thanks very much for your time today. Look, the violence does seem to be increasing, although it's hard to get a track sometimes on who might be pushed and retaliatory action and so on. Is it in the interest of Beijing to try to have this as violent as possible and hope support for protesters ebbs?
Well, it seems that the Hong Kong police have basically been put on the front line trying to solve what's effectively a political problem with a criminal justice solution, which is just not going to work in the short term or the medium term. But I guess the calculus there would be they can effectively beat people off the streets on the one hand, arrest and prosecute enough people that you take the oxygen out of the movement. But so far, the opposite has happened in some senses, that the more people are pushed, the more they get their backs up and the more they're defiant. So it doesn't seem like there's any easy solution in sight here.
Right, because we're not talking about this small minority of the overall population, which is often the number of protesters that actually get out there, but so many have taken to the streets. This sort of approach, you think, will backfire, at least with Hong Kong, but maybe increase the argument, at least for the government within mainland China?
Well, I think the point is Hong Kong is ultimately divided. It's about half of the city support democracy, half support the Chinese government, the Communist Party. And what we've seen is that the numbers on the streets may have been dwindling, but the support for them amid wider Hong Kong society is still deep. And now many people's anger has been turned in on the police. A recent survey showed that half of Hong Kongers basically have zero trust in their own police force. So this is really, really worrying for the city going forward.
It's a pretty extraordinary number. It's gone on for so long, of course. The pictures don't get any better. And we've got the 70th anniversary celebrations tomorrow. Is there any sense the regime might be trying to figure out what concessions they can make, and at the same time that protesters will settle for anything less than all of the key calls they've been making now for the past few months?
Well, I was at the protest here in Sydney yesterday, just talking to people, and here in Hong Kong, Hong Kongers around the world are sticking to their 5 demands, not one less. So I think they're really unlikely to give ground. And the same is probably true on the other side. I don't think the Communist Party of China, Xi Jinping, is in the mood for concessions right now. And I think they can probably live with quite a high degree of instability in Hong Kong for quite a long time. I don't think they're going to be pressured into backing down. So I expect the pressure is just going to be ratcheted up more and more. And then it's a question of how people react. Will they break at some point and just give up? We certainly haven't seen the signs of that yet. And even if this movement right now runs out of steam, the kind of core issues, people's frustration with China's pressure on their freedoms, on their identity, that doesn't go away. Those core issues were there before this movement, and they'll be there afterwards too. Until there's a political solution, I don't see the problems there ebbing.
It's worth pausing and just remembering it wasn't that long ago, really, 20 years ago, when Hong Kongers were so positive about reunification. There was a proud moment about, again, being a part of China, and probably a real hope for the future that democracy in some way would be able to still flourish. And that seems to be dashed. But that's where this resistance, I suppose, comes from, what people's hopes were, even if people think that was not going to happen.
Yeah, I think we see a clash of basically two systems that are fundamentally incompatible. So the communist-led system in mainland China, the liberal values and democracy that many people in Hong Kong want to see. And I guess back in 1997 at the handover, there was a hope that somehow Hong Kong might lift up the rest of China, which would slowly become a bit more democratic, and the two systems would somehow meet in the middle. But if anything, the opposite has happened, and that's accelerated really in the last few years under Xi Jinping. So China's been centralizing power, becoming more authoritarian, squeezing dissidents and critics, democracy activists at home, and the same in Hong Kong. Yet I think Hong Kong's people's desires haven't really changed. So the two, where there was a hope they might move together, they've really been diverging quite dramatically. And that's the fundamental political problem that underlines everything.
The UK Foreign Minister has said that Britain won't ignore that treatment of protesters, and, well, look, no leaders are ignoring it. But what does that mean in practice? Is it going to have much of an impact?
I think it's unlikely. I mean, the first problem is, of course, that every country in the world recognises that Hong Kong is part of China, so in some sense this is an internal issue. Balanced against that, of course, Hong Kong has special access to global markets because it's autonomous, so there's some pressure, I think, that foreign governments can exert there. The question is, will they? I mean, if you look at Britain right now, mired in problems of Brexit and everything else, it's highly unlikely that the British government will be picking a fight with Beijing when it needs trading and investment partners around the world. But even for other countries too, for Australia, you know, there are so many issues where people want China's support. It's hard to imagine them pushing too hard on this question of Hong Kong, which is in some senses an internal one. Although, as I said, Hong Kong's access to global markets, the fact that it's an international city, a separate member of the World Trading Organization, that gives governments outside a pressure point if they want to use it. But certainly we haven't seen many wanting to step up yet.
No, we haven't. Fascinating to see how that plays out, particularly tomorrow with that anniversary. Ben Bland from the Lowy Institute, thanks for your time today.
Thanks.